special meeting of the Traffic and Parking Advisory Board meeting to order. Good afternoon and welcome. This board reviews items of interest regarding parking and traffic items. We are an advisory board, and our favorable recommendation today, although this is only a workshop session according to Mr. Collins, as I see him nod. So there's no point in discussing the two intervening paragraphs in this opening statement, but I am going to ask that if anyone has any comments, they please raise their hand. You'll be recognized. And we'll continue discussion. So without further ado, I will ask for the calling of the roll to ensure a quorum is present. At least go ahead, sorry.
Schneider?
Here.
Shazinski?
Here.
Hanson?
Here.
Becker?
Here. That constitutes a quorum for us.
Call it bike and ped to order.
So, yeah, now if we could call bike and ped to order, kind of go back to the agenda, we'll do the minutes and all of that stuff quick. And then.
Call bike and ped to order.
You want the list?
I'll just guess. Can I just see who's present? We have to say your name.
Do a roll like normal.
So Adam Belfrelli.
Here.
Misty McPhee, not present. Brad Brown, not present. And Stan.
Here.
Laura Palmieri.
Here.
And Sean Lynch.
Here.
I think that's everyone.
Now you can do minutes. You can do minutes for the last meeting.
Oh, yeah. Entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved. Second.
Any questions, any changes? No? Take a vote. Or, yeah. All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Then, motion carries.
All right, so I'll just intervene here then. So we, just point of order, we will have the presentation and then we'll give an opportunity for the public to comment and give any input that they have. So I'm just going to borrow your mic. So I have Mike and Jamie here from KL Engineering. The city had engaged them to do a traffic study for South Main Street from South Park Avenue to Waukah Avenue. And this is a result of, and some of the residents, I believe, I probably haven't met them in person, but I know I've corresponded with people over the last couple of years about this area, and there are concerns with, most of the correspondence I got was with traffic safety as well as bike and pedestrian safety. So we engaged KL to do a study of that area like we usually do before we would do any major road improvements. Also, this is state connecting highways, so WISDOT would have to approve any changes like they did with some of the other areas, Jackson and Murdoch, for example. So we need their study to get WISDOT's buy-off as well. So tonight we are going to have a presentation from KL Engineering on the study they did, and then like I said, then we'll give an opportunity for the public to give any comments and input, and then the goal or the thought process was then each of the boards and committees at their August or their next meeting then would take action on the study, whether to recommend it to council or not. And then we would look at including funding for this if favorable recommendations to council and council agreed for budget for 2023 for implementation. So I'll turn it over to Mike and Jamie.
All right. So appreciate the opportunity to bring this up for today's board committee meeting. Again, my name is Mike Scarman. With me is Jamie Dahlheim. We are both traffic engineers with KL Engineering. We've been fortunate to do a fair amount of work with City Oshkosh and a couple projects similar. So Jamie's just handed out, we have a kind of a fact sheet, one pager front and back. Should be enough for everybody at the table. And then there's a couple plots that just show the proposed and a new roadway lane configurations, just the new marking layout. So we got a couple copies if maybe you guys want to share those. So I think just to give a little bit of expectations, we have several slides just to step through the study that we did.
Same, is it?
Would encourage, I think,
Okay.
Everybody at the table, if there's questions, terminology, anything that is unclear, feel free to just, shout out anything you would like clarification that might benefit other people here too. So don't hesitate to ask questions along the way. It's just a quick agenda for the conversation. Jamie's going to take us through most of it, but give a little bit of project background. Jim did a nice job setting the stage for that. But we'll focus in a couple different areas. We look in the context of these type of traffic studies about kind of existing conditions, get a handle on how things are working now, both from a traffic flow and a traffic safety perspective. And then we kind of analyze the options, alternatives for kind of proposed changes, and then leave with some conclusions in terms of whether a preferred improvement is identified or multiple, or what options are on the table. So I guess just a little background on the timeline. It was kind of the end of 2021. We were reached out, the city reached out, asked us to consider this study. We did do traffic counts. It was, I think, in February, so kind of the late winter months, followed by doing the traffic analysis, looking at crash data. We submitted and received a traffic forecast from the DOT. They project kind of future traffic that would be on the road. So doing all that throughout the course of the spring, we did complete a report. I think that's been handed out, or I don't know if people have seen the actual report. But that's been submitted to the city. That was in late May. So I guess kind of brings us to today's meeting, kind of where we go from here. Looking for input, questions from this group. We'll take that and finalize that report if there's things to change or update or kind of look at differently. And then ultimately that goes to DOT for their approval. As Jim mentioned, this is connecting highways, so they have, it's a city street, but they have a level of jurisdiction because it's Highway 45. With their blessing, which I think, we're anticipating they'll be favorable. They did approve something very similar just to the north. And this type of roadway improvement is something that DOT does frequently throughout the state. So with their approval, as Jim mentioned, gives you the opportunity to then restripe the roadway as this report suggests, or in some other variation of it, but essentially a road diet, taking it from 4 to 2 lanes with turn lanes. So I'll be brief, a bit more on the background, just kind of the study we did. It's a traffic and safety study, so we look at both, how well traffic flows, but also the safety characteristics, components of kind of how things work now versus how these changes might affect that. We're looking at getting traffic counts, just kind of looking at what turning movements at intersections, overall traffic flow during the day, and then kind of translating that into just different ways to stripe the roadway, different lane configurations, kind of looking at it from a continuity standpoint too, because the road to the south is kind of a rural 2-lane section, then it transitions into most recently converted section to the north. It's got some turn lanes. We're looking at a little bit different cross section in this piece, but kind of just understanding the continuity of the whole section of Main Street in this area. So again, purpose of the meeting is kind of review the road diet options and performance metrics that our study found, and really looking for input questions from this group. So I think with that, Jamie, take us through the rest of the presentation. And again, if there's questions, please feel free to shout those out. We'll do our best to answer those as we go.
Just real quick, just to clarify then, that the scope is only between Waka and South Park, not coming up to the river?
Correct.
That's correct.
Yeah, we restriped that with the project last year. We restriped from 8th to South Park, so that part's already done with 1 lane in each direction. It's a little different in that section because the goal with and Mark can jump in as well, but the goal for that section was to add parking for the Sawmill District.
Yeah,
Sawdust District.
If you recall, into the Sawdust District plan, we had the current roadway configuration within the Sawdust District, the intermediate plan of getting parking added to help businesses, and the long-range plan of that section being completely reconstructed. In the 28 to 30 range, we're using the interconnected highway funds, which I believe I've heard correctly, James submitted the application and got approved. Now we just kind of find out where we end up in the funding for that. So that section, we already did the restriping, added parking on site, one travel lane in each direction. And then ultimately, when we achieve the wider right-of-way in 28 to 30, it'll be completely rebuilt, more similar to what you see in front of the arena. This request that came in was specific to the southern part.
Okay.
And KL had to do a little bit of work with us on the restriping of the northern section because we had to do some light timings and stuff for WIDOT, all because of the interconnected highway.
Okay.
We did a very similar study for that section that was in a little different character where there's more traffic signals. So it's, we designated left turn lanes in this section. We're talking more of the two-way left turn lane. So, but very similar approach in that section. So.
All right. So, like Jim said, our corridor that we looked at went on South Main Street from Waukah Avenue to the south, all the way to South Park Avenue to match into that restriping that was just redone. It's a 1.85 mile corridor, so kind of a long stretch of road. That whole section is a 4-lane undivided road right now. There's no on-street parking, and the only turn lanes are at South Park that were just added, I think in 2021, correct? In that area, there are over 90 access points, and that includes driveways to houses, public streets, and driveways to businesses. So mostly residential and commercial areas. And then there's also that railroad that crosses just south of 24th Avenue, which we had to look at a little bit closer as well. So the first thing we did was we collected traffic counts in February of this past year. We focused specifically on the morning and afternoon peak periods during the weekdays, and we looked at our existing 2022, and then we looked at 20 years in the future with the forecasted volumes that WISDOT provided to us. We wanted to make sure that whatever we're recommending will work in the future, not just for right now. And the forecast estimated kind of minimal growth since this area is pretty built out already. We kind of zoned in on 3 main study intersections with Waukah Avenue to the south, 24th Avenue a little bit to the north, and then all the way up at South Park Avenue. And these 3 intersections just had a little bit more traffic volumes. They're more connected to the other main streets that go through the city. So we identified those as being a little bit more, we wanted to focus in on them a little bit more, right? After that, we looked at our existing crashes. We pulled crashes from WISDOT from 2016 to 2020, as that was the most recent completed year that was available. And there were 58 reported crashes in that 5-year span. Of those 58, we found that 39% of the crashes were angle crashes, and they're mostly from cars turning from the Minor Street out into South Main Street and crashing into somebody on South Main Street. So that is one of the main problems with having a 4-lane undivided, is making sure that vehicles are clear in all 4 lanes. We also found that 24% of the crashes were rear-end crashes at intersections, and with the lack of left turn lanes, we found that if somebody's slowing down in the left lane to turn left, if there's somebody who's distracted or moving a little bit too fast, then that can cause a rear end. We also found that 37% of all of the crashes had injuries, so they ranged from very minor injuries to a little bit more severe, but they're all definitely something to take into account. And then we calculated the crash rate at South Main Street and 24th Avenue, and we found that the crash rate was greater than one crash per million entering vehicles, correct? And that just sets off a little bit of a red flag to us and WISDOT, so we wanted to make sure that we address that and some of our safety concerns that we've heard from before. So we analyzed the whole corridor using some software and observations, And we found that South Main Street is operating well under our capacity limits. The average daily traffic is about 8,000 vehicles per day, which is well within the bounds of a 4-lane highway, even a 2-lane roadway. That's pretty well under capacity for that. So we're operating at a level of service A, we found currently, and in our 20-year look ahead, and that is extremely acceptable, almost free flow down South Main Street. Oh, that went forward. Sorry. And then we found that all of our side streets were operating at a level of service C or better, which is tolerable, not extremely long delays or queues that we found. We did mention before, so there's no separate left turn lanes for our access points going onto South Main Street or on South Main Street, which can lead to some pretty poor lane utilization with cars that are turning left or right. So you can see in this screenshot on the screen that the left turn lane, or the left lane moving southbound, pretty much all of the vehicles traveling south are in that left lane. So it did kind of hip hop between the right lane and the left lane that we noticed, but in general, most of the vehicles are in one lane or the other at the same time. And here's just a little snippet video of at 24th Avenue. You can see a little unsafe maneuver with somebody turning left here. This car kind of moves around into the right lane and into the left lane, which can cause some potential safety issues with side swipes and just generally unsafe movements. So after we looked at all of that, we went back to what the city wanted for their goals and objectives of this corridor, and we wanted to make sure that we were maintaining or increasing the efficiency of movement through South Main Street, through that whole corridor. We wanted to maintain or increase our operations through the side roads as well. We obviously want to increase safety as much as we can on South Main Street and our side streets. Maintaining access to all of those 90+ access points was also a big factor in our decisions, and we wanted to increase our multimodal facilities, so accommodating bicycles, pedestrians a little bit better, and we wanted to do this all within our existing curb and gutter. So we're not talking about reconstructing, tearing up the road, mostly just repainting that corridor. So with all of those goals and objectives in mind, we came up with some recommendations for what we can do with the corridor. We looked at specifically allowing for left turns off of South Main Street a little bit safer and a little bit easier. And we looked at including some bicycle accommodations along South Main Street, and again, maintaining access to all of our access points. Which leads us to a road diet, and this can increase safety, and it essentially kind of narrows the roadway down from 2 travel lanes down to 1, and introducing that 2-way left turn lane or left turn lanes, and then that gives room for bicycle lanes as well on the street. So we looked at exclusive left turn lanes for all of our access points, because this is a little bit more rural than kind of that segment to the north of South Park. We decided that maybe a 2-way left turn lane would be more efficient to help with all of those smaller access points that people don't turn into and out of as often, but still need that extra space to be able to turn into and out of. So incorporating this would involve reducing the number of through lanes from 2 to 1 in each direction, and this 2-way left turn lane or twiddle would allow for a continuous left turn lane so that you can turn into all of those smaller access points and side streets along the whole corridor. One of the main benefits of this is that it reduces the number of conflict points we have, as cars that are turning from the south, from the side streets, they only have 3 kind of lanes of traffic to travel across instead of 4 now, which can help reduce those angle crashes. And then we also looked closer to 24th Avenue, where we had a little bit of a higher crash rate, and we would recommend that we provide exclusive left turn lanes there. So converting that twiddle into exclusive left turn lanes just at that intersection, and then expanding it back to a twiddle on either side.
I'm sorry, is there an image to show, if you go back, to show that transition from the dedicated or exclusive left turn lanes to the twiddle?
Yeah, I actually have that in here. I think I did put that in later in the slideshow too.
Oh, okay.
Let me, should I go to it real quick?
Yeah, if you want to jump to that, it's also, if you have one of these packets, you know, that shows that intersection as well, so.
The reason I ask, Jim, we've had as you know, over on Oshkosh Avenue, where it kind of has that dedicated left, then straight, then dedicated left. There's a lot of confusion over there. Is that what they're describing here?
Which area?
Over on Oshkosh Avenue, at like right around Arboretum and Algoma, where there's like, for a few hundred feet, there's dedicated right, and then it goes to straight only, then it's dedicated left and straight.
Oh.
Do you know what I'm saying? That
Yeah,
that kind of
Congress,
leapfrog.
But like high Congress, yeah. No, that wouldn't be.
Okay.
To be different than that. Basically, here they're only talking about the dedicated left turn lanes at the intersection.
Yeah, so if you look here, so this is 24th Avenue, this is, north is facing to the right. So we would have a two-way left turn lane up until we're, you know, within 100, 200 feet of the intersection. And then we would recommend kind of adding a double yellow line here to close off the twiddle, and then you would have that left turn lane forming. And then cars can turn into and out of. And it would be very similar just to the south of that.
So this is more like Murdoch.
It's more like, or even like Jackson in New York.
I was
Or
going to
Jackson
say, the
in
new
Church.
Jackson
Yeah,
section.
okay.
To that point, though, that the mayor makes, I'm looking at the house that's on the west of that intersection, on what would be the north.
At this one right
That
here.
one right there. Mm-hmm. Is that person not then unable to get to their home from the south?
Well, so we, I guess with the turn lane length, I guess, because that's not set in stone or anything.
Yeah, and there's some flexibility. You know, it's really the important, I think, in our minds was this is a more prominent intersection. The turning movements are more significant.
Well, I get it, but I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here for a second, because if that was my house, I'd be a little less than happy.
Yeah. Ultimately, I mean, the lines that are throughout the twiddle are kind of legal. You can cross those. You can turn across those. So this one is right at the, you know, beginning of the twiddle section. So I think technically they should legally really be no different than if they were 200 feet upstream. They can cross there. It's all paint, so it's maybe a little matter of comfort level.
And the willingness of OPD to enforce state statute, because they're crossing a solid yellow line at that point. It's actually technically 2 lane changes, if I'm remembering my state statute correctly.
And that might be something, you know, we worked over an aerial, so the precision of the kind of those features, if that were a concern, you know, you could take, say, 25 feet out of that left turn lane, extend that twiddle, just so those markings were clearly right in front of that driveway. I think our intention was not to restrict that driveway from being able to turn in and out. It was more just to kind of make a prominent movement for left turns at this intersection. The storage lengths that we're showing are kind of round numbers that are, I think, reasonable, but those can be adjusted when you have situations like an individual's driveway, just to, we don't want to block anybody off. You know,
Right.
there's not, if that was a business, there was more movements there, that might be kind of more consequential.
Which goes to the question I was going to ask of Mr. Collins. Do we have traffic counts at 24th and South Main?
Yeah, they have that in their study.
Well, my question ultimately is, how many people actually go east at that intersection? Because that queue length for the
From-
left turn,
From the north, are you talking?
yeah, we're coming northbound and hang that left.
So
There can't be more than a few a day unless it's a weekend, because that's the yacht club, isn't it?
Yes, this is the boat launch
Yeah.
down here. On the day that we counted, I believe there were about 100 vehicles that turned left.
That was February, so I mean,
Okay, I was-
their count too, so.
I was
Right.
wrong, I'll admit it. I didn't think there'd be that many.
But yeah, and again, there might have been, a special event going on, and in the summer, we would expect it to be a little bit more busy with having, people with their boats launching.
Which goes to
right
my
there,
point
too.
though, because if they're coming southbound, they're gonna need a longer queuing distance if they've got truck and trailer.
So, and Jamie, I think you'll touch on that. We did look at the operations and, ultimately, none of these were problematically, this didn't demonstrate a need to, say, put a traffic signal or anything to handle that. So I think you'll step through some of that here in a bit. So.
Okay.
Jim, I would imagine this is similar to Jackson, where we start with a plan and then refine what those specific each lane would
This is just
be.
a concept at this point.
I get it, like I said, I'm trying to play devil's advocate here.
And that drive, I guess my answer to the driveway is, obviously like Mike explained, that it's not an engineered plan yet, so we try to minimize that problem. However, if I lived there, I would want to turn right into my driveway.
I would too,
I'd
but,
probably go around the block, but
well,
no, I understand your point though. Yeah, that could be a problem.
Can you zoom in on that?
Yeah.
Does that drive go between the two houses? Like, is that a garage there coming off South Main? Like, if we go up now to the
here?
west, yeah. No, it doesn't go all the way through, so that's their only driveway access, is that right, to that second house there?
yeah, it would
Yeah,
appear
I believe
so.
It looks like that, yeah.
All right, thank you.
I guess, while we're talking, if you pan to the left a little bit, Jamie, the commercial property, that's the drive-in.
Yep.
Their driveway is probably in a location where, as cars stack up, that's not necessarily somewhere that they may restrict that to more of a right turns only type of driveway. They do have access off of 24th though as well, so.
This is also the intersection that had the concerning crash history, right?
Yes.
Correct.
So these two screenshots are kind of what we found based on WSDOT guidelines and then what we ultimately would recommend for our typical section. So that top screenshot is a typical section with acceptable lane widths. So we can have a bike lane of anywhere between 4 and 7 feet, a travel lane between 10 and 12, and the twiddle can be between 12 and 16 feet. And just kind of playing around with those widths and maintaining continuity with the section to the north and typical widths that we see, we ultimately recommended, or we are recommending that bottom screenshot with 5-foot bike lane width, 11-foot travel lanes, which is what we have to the north there, and a 14-foot twiddle. And that'll fit perfectly within that curb and gutter line. 14 feet is pretty typical, 5 feet bike lane is pretty typical.
Maybe just a brief, we also talked to Jim and kind of considered buffered bike lanes. I don't know if that's a familiar topic, but basically a narrower bike lane and potentially a narrower travel lane, making up for that space with kind of a double white line. Kind of stepped away from that just with this being fairly conventional and effective, I guess, in our opinion, so.
And what would the sidewalk allowance be then in that scenario?
So we weren't recommending to change anything with the sidewalk. I know throughout the corridor, the sidewalk is butted up right against that curb sometimes, and sometimes there is some terrace. But I believe the sidewalk is acceptable with a 5 or 6 foot width.
And really no changes to crosswalks, I guess, if they're in locations now, we didn't necessarily see any need to change those, move them to opposite side of intersections. They felt, I guess, pretty adequate with the proposed typical section. It'll be easier for pedestrians to cross because you don't have kind of 4 lanes of traffic to monitor. It's really only 2. Left turns are a little easier to understand kind of what those drivers are doing in that center lane, so.
What is the current sidewalk width down there?
5, I
I'm
guess.
guessing it's probably 5.
Yeah, I think it goes between 5 and 6, depending on whether there's the
Like
terrace.
it's about a 5-foot walk.
So after we kind of recommended or came up with our recommendation for a typical section, we ran the same kind of analysis through our softwares and just kind of history of this type of typical section. And so essentially the big benefits of having a twiddle is that we're removing our left turns from the through moving traffic, which you can see with those purple arrows. This allows cars to move out of the through lane, slow down, and then make their turns safely without having to worry as much about somebody not slowing down behind them and causing a rear end crash. For pedestrians, having a twiddle would remove that kind of multi-lane threat condition, which you can see on the little bottom graphic there. With 2 travel lanes, sometimes one lane of traffic will stop for a pedestrian and the other lane may not, and essentially removing one of those lanes from each direction of traffic would remove that threat and increase safety for pedestrians crossing. It also allows for pedestrians to kind of sit in that twiddle area so they can make more of a 2-stage crossing, so they don't have to find a larger gap to cross the street through. Reducing the lanes also, like I said, will allow for that bike lane to be added on the ends of on the sides of the street. With our analysis, we found that the mainline operations are expected to remain pretty similar to existing, just very slight changes, pretty negligible changes to operations. Like we said, this corridor is operating well under our capacity, so by even removing one of our through lanes in each direction, we're still under capacity, still pretty well within our acceptable ranges. And our side streets, we expect to be minimally impacted. There might be a slight reduction in gaps because all of our vehicles are in one lane now, but we didn't notice anything kind of to...
No dramatic degradation of, it's not going to double the wait time to turn left off of a side street. It's going to be, I think, fairly imperceptible to most people. And in cases like this, with 4 lanes, sometimes it's just difficult to judge because you've got 2 lanes in each direction, traffic staggered. When you reduce that, it concentrates the traffic, but you have half as many lanes to keep track of. So you it's a horse apiece often. With these type of improvements, people generally perceive, it's all, if not easier, more or less the same in terms of the ability to get on and off.
So then we also performed a predictive crash modeling analysis with some software that WSDOT uses in their more formal reports. And our results indicated that going from our existing typical section to what we're recommending expects to decrease our crashes overall by 16%, which is pretty significant. And then, like we said, so there are other safety benefits of having a twiddle, removing those left turn vehicles. Hopefully we will see some easier through and turning movements from the side roads because we only have, one lane to navigate rather than making sure that there's a gap in all 4 lanes of traffic. We're adding that dedicated space for bicycle lanes and reducing our number of lanes for pedestrians. So hopefully that should make it a little bit easier for pedestrians to cross the street there.
I think maybe it's fair to say this 16% reduction is a methodology that the DOT uses. It kind of ignores all the driveways. It's more of just kind of looking at the road feature itself. So I think our judgment is if you give credit to the amount of driveways, the amount of turns that happen in mid-block segments, 16 I think is the kind of low end of potential crash reduction. It's not unlikely to be greater than that. It's I think fair to say that it's probably going to be at least that, if not greater. So
overall, we're essentially recommending that South Main Street be restriped into a 3-lane roadway with a twiddle in the center, adding those on-street bicycle lanes and providing exclusive left turn lanes at 24th Avenue to kind of better combat that the higher crash rate and slightly higher volumes turning on 24th. So with that, here's our contact information up at the top if you come up with any questions or comments after this meeting. But if there are any questions or comments now, we'd be happy to answer anything.
Do you have a concept drawing for the transition from existing Main Street to this that we can see?
We do, it's,
Along the north end, are you talking about?
Yes,
Or?
near the
South
stadium.
Park intersection?
Yeah.
Yes, we should have that in here. Oh, I didn't. So this is what we had before. So this is South Park here. It's a little bit small, but this is kind of what South Main Street turned into, right? So we have a left turn lane here and a through lane here, and then the on-street parking kind of starts here. So with our recommendation, we would actually have our twiddle extending up until kind of that left turn lane starts. So if you flip actually to the last page, I believe, in those concept drawings, we should have a little bit.
you have, it's on that jump drive, can you
Oh
maybe
yeah,
just pull
actually.
up that?
Yeah, I can.
It might be useful, we can kind of take you from south to north and just give you a visual of those striping plans. That's what the long plots you have in front of you, so.
Yes. Whoops. Alrighty, so this is kind of our preliminary concept of what we kind of recommend for the transition. It would be pretty similar to what we would recommend at 24th, where we have this twiddle so that you can still turn, you know, southbound using a twiddle onto 14th Avenue here. And then kind of where that turn lane taper starts is when we cut off the twiddle and turn that into an exclusive left turn lane.
This is signalized intersection, so this will have more stacking, more queuing regularly. So I think this lane is probably a greater priority just because that will regularly see queues, so.
Main Street's not as wide there as it is further south, is it?
I don't know that the width varies necessarily.
I don't think it does.
It just seems like it's narrower, you know, as the more city portion of it.
Yeah.
Must give that,
Yeah.
yeah,
I'm not,
illusion of
without
that.
checking, I'm not positive, but I don't think it.
I mean, it's so wide open, you know,
Right.
further south, you know, that it's like a freeway almost, you know.
And Jamie, maybe kind of step back at the beginning. There's a couple elements of this corridor that were unique when we did the kind of lane layouts. You know, on the south end, it's where as you come from the south, it's kind of a rural 2-lane highway, so right now it kind of flares out. What our suggestion is, you know, you have the space there, so as you go northbound is to create a left turn lane here. That space already exists. Didn't really have a better way to deal with that, so this would have a dedicated left unlike today, and it pushes traffic in the through lane to the far right side, and you continue on in that position. And then southbound, basically, you know, that lane terminates. Today we're looking at is, you know, really just scrubbing the couple lane dashes that are south of Waukah, and said basically there are no 2-lane southbound segment. It'll go straight through as a 1-lane southbound movement.
Should I show the railroad crossing
Yeah, I was
too?
thinking if you skip ahead, it's fairly uniform up until a point, so.
Yeah, so we're recommending pretty much a twiddle the whole way, and then once we get close to that railroad crossing, there are WSDOT guidelines that prevent a twiddle going over a railroad crossing. The recommendation, I believe, is between 100 and 200 feet, you cannot have a twiddle. So we are kind of just recommending adding some cross hatching to kind of shut that twiddle down. You can't really turn, in this area as much either. So just kind of closing that down, but maintaining that space so that we still only have one travel lane. And then once we're outside of those limits, we would just open the lane back up to allow turns again.
Before you move on,
Yeah.
what's the distance between the tracks and Cimarron Court?
So I have that measured. Oops, sorry.
Because again, I'm going to make the same argument I made before,
Right.
which is I'd be less than happy if I couldn't get to my.
So, yeah. So from here, it's about 250 feet. So with, a little bit more refinement, actually planning, we could even, cut that off at the recommendation is 100 to 200 feet. So if there's, a lot of people who want to turn onto Cimarron Court, we could, push that closer to that lower bound, which would still be acceptable.
Anybody know how many residential units are in Cimarron Court? I'm guessing it's 50 to 60, just best guess. What's that, Courtney?
I agree with you. It should be pushed in farther.
Yeah.
There are a fair amount of units back in there. And, I think the same applies on the opposite side, on the other side of the tracks. There are some driveways. People will, my opinion, probably just ignore the hatching and turn left. And, if that's an issue, I think it's more of an enforcement situation. But it will be striped in a fashion that, would technically say that's prohibited.
Can you zoom in on the lower measurements?
Down here. Yes. Yeah, so we have it measured at 190 feet for the stop bar. And again, between 100 and 200 feet is acceptable to WSDOT, so.
Can you do it at 100? So like if they say up between 100 and 200.
Yep.
Could we make it as small as possible, theoretically?
I think the judgment could be made. I think if it's a high volume street, the traffic engineer would say, we'll make that 200 because it's more significant. If it's somebody's driveway, then the low end is a reasonable judgment to make. So that's kind of the idea between a lot of those ranges are, whether it's a more or less kind of significant movement that you're trying to provide space. So.
We already know people are going to be turning on it, so we're going to make it batched or cut it short so that you're at least included. That's
Exactly.
what I'm thinking about.
The track here is skewed as well, so if you measure from one side versus the other, that 100 to 200 is up to 25 feet different just because of that angle. So there's some room for judgment there.
Which is a nice segue to one of my other questions, which is, and again, I'm not as well versed with where all the bike lanes are in town, Jim, but do we actually have another bike lane in town that goes across a set of tracks at something other than a 90-degree angle? I don't think we do. All the east-wests go straight across at a 90-degree angle.
Can you think of any train tracks that are not 90 degrees that bike lanes go through?
Yeah,
Harrison Street?
There's no bike lanes there.
No. The reason I ask, obviously, is it's going to take a little more room for a bike to get over those tracks because you can't go across at anything other than 90 without wiping out.
Right. So it looks like there is some room kind of here. So what we were talking about and is what we could do is with roundabouts, we'll actually kind of push those bike lanes off of the roadway so that they aren't going through the roundabout, they're going around it. So we could potentially, have bikes follow off this sidewalk here and, maybe extend it so that they're, crossing more perpendicular and then they hop back on the road here. And that's certainly, I think, something that is.
I think that's a possibility if
Yeah.
it became an issue. And I think what I've seen a lot is certain agencies will provide kind of a bulb so cyclists can square up just because, at some angle your tires can get caught in there at times. I guess we didn't necessarily kind of diagnosed to that level for this one specifically, but I think like Jamie mentioned, if that became a concern, you know, maybe widening this section of sidewalk and allowing cyclists to just zip around using, because that at grade, you know, those panels are meant for traversability. Unlike in the road, there's a bigger gap. So, you know, I guess that would be probably our first kind of suggestion, is to look at doing something like that if it was an issue for cyclists crossing at that angle.
Job worth doing is worth doing right.
Well, the same would be true if somebody was using like a motorized wheelchair, right?
Yeah.
My mom's been in them. She's gotten stuck on the tracks because of those
Exactly.
weird angle things. Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with just the condition of the track crossing. You know, some are older, you know, and those gaps can vary as kind of those crossings degrade. And I think there's features, you know, when you've seen them, sidewalks, those are narrower just because they know pedestrians and cyclists and wheelchairs are going to traverse those. So.
Well, especially where those smaller kind of, I don't know what they're called, the smaller wheels that, caster
wheels,
type,
yeah.
if it's not a 90-degree clunk.
It's worth stating, though, that any of this redesign is going to be safer than what exists currently. So that's the other point here. No matter how the turns are going to be made, no matter how engineering will figure out to put crossing the tracks, all of these would be safer than what's there now.
I would definitely suggest that's a fair statement.
I know that, I know some of the public wants to speak, because I don't want to cut anybody, if you guys have more discussion, or if we can do that after, but I want to make sure they get their chance.
So we can allow that?
Yes.
Okay.
There's one other aspect, maybe if Jamie can advance the slide, just to give some context. So these two-way left turn lanes often have kind of back-to-back arrows to kind of alert drivers that you can turn in either direction using that lane. So there's a good chunk of this where it's parallel to the tracks. These drawings show either no arrows in this segment where there just are no driveways on either side. That's somewhat optional. A lot of times, you know, agencies will just put them there regardless. And then there's, you know, some sections where you can turn to the west but not to the east, and, you know, you could make the judgment to just put the arrow that points the direction, or put them both. I mean, there's kind of rules of thumb that kind of allow either way. So just for kind of as you reference these drawings, there's some notes to that effect as well. I think that's the main points we had.
That's your kind of your meeting. You want to open up to the public then?
Certainly, yeah. I'd open up to, is it 3 minutes or 5? I don't know what we put on here.
Oh, my dog leg.
But
Yeah.
if you want to come up to the podium and give your name and address.
Have the fun of doing.
Hello, my name is Gregory Jansen, 3039 Lake Rest Court. I've been at that intersection of Lake Rest and Fond du Lac Ave for 20 years. You have addressed every issue that was a concern. It is amazing what the work you have finished and completed and what you've done for studies. One thing that may be missed, and I'd like to bring up the speed. Currently, I live on 100 yards from Wakaw Avenue on the south end of this discussion. I've seen vehicles well over 80 miles an hour, 75 to 100, in fact, easily. These cars are racing to get to back to the one lane in front of the citizens that are doing the speed limit. And they will not give up. They will continue to go, 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 and they will race each other until gravel is flying. They do not care. Our children are at total risk here, and it's all about our children's safety. You have 4 parks along this corridor, 4 city parks. No access for our children. My wife has MS. We can't even we have to put our bicycles on the back of a vehicle in order to get out of the neighborhood in order to bike safely. So there's so much concern here for our children and their safety, and we feel totally neglected without any help because the sidewalks are so adjacent to this 45, 55, 60 mile an hour traffic with 80,000-pound semis 1 inch from your leg as the mirrors go over your head. And that is not a short section. That is all the way from at least Game Time Bar all the way past Ardianette's. So, and then as you cross onto the bridges, you are tight to the traffic and you're tight to a guardrail. You have nowhere to go. So you've really addressed everything that we have a concern about with that current configuration. Yes, there's devil in the details and figuring out the little things. But we're not concerned about, you will manage that for us. We're concerned about the big picture, getting the middle turn lane, the 2 lanes, 1 in each direction, the bike lanes wide enough that we feel safe on the sidewalk, especially wheelchairs. We have at least 3 wheelchair people coming out of Old Orchard, coming out of Jacob, coming out of Isaac. We have a large volume of people, Waukau, as well as all the Lake Crest lanes, courts, and avenues. So we have so many people trying to use this corridor and so unsafe. So the speed is also an issue. And yes, I feel that going to 1 lane will slow people down a bit. But I've seen 35 turn into 55, turn into 70. And the most I see through Jackson, which you've done correctly down 9th Avenue, all these beautiful changes you made, it's 30 miles an hour. And we feel we deserve that for our children. So that's the only point I'd like to make in your design and your change and your thought process. But I thank you so much for your effort, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart, because my wife has MS, and we cannot bike out of our neighborhood. We cannot get out of our neighborhood. And we felt we had a clean slate last year with the construction, knowing there was no striping at all. We felt we had that opportunity right there to not lay any money down and then the money all go to good instead of grinding this all off and that money all going to bad. So, but that's over, it's done. Now I think we're in the right direction. I feel you have addressed everything, and I would like to thank you again.
Other public comments? Thoughts?
Yes, I am Al Reisler, and I live at 3019 Lake Rest Court. And we come out of there and go to Waco. But the reason I'd like to see this change to this, because of the bike lanes, because my wife is in a wheelchair, and we used to go for a walk on the thing, and the bikes now, they have to use the sidewalk, so that we have to, she can't get, I can't take her on the sidewalks to get for a ride. So I really appreciate what you all did. Thank you.
Excellent. We can bring it back then. Discussion. Yeah.
I guess, kind of going back to one of the points that was made about the 4 parks. Can we look at an aerial, maybe? Is Fugelberg one of them, one of the parks? At the, I guess, crosswalk there by Fugelberg, that would, are there planned bump outs or anything like that there?
No, well, I can answer that. Right now, we're just looking at this as a restriping project. But I know that, so this would be, maintaining the curbs and gutters as they are, but then just restriping the road, similar to what we did on, Jackson, Murdoch, 9th. But yeah, if you want to look at the park area.
So that would be the top left, basically.
Because I seem to recall a couple years ago being over there with the Parks Committee, and I was on my bike, and I think I was coming east off that sidewalk there, and since there's no sidewalk on the east side, I can't even remember why I was crossing, to be honest, but I just recall it being kind of treacherous. And so is that a potential bump out consideration, or do we know, Jim, do you know, like in the CIP, if there's any anticipation of going into sidewalk on the east side?
I don't off the top of my head, but yeah, that's something we could look at with something. Obviously, that's would be a more expensive project than restriping, but I'm not sure where sidewalks are. I'm not aware of it being in the immediate CIP. I know it's not in the next year or two. I don't know, Mark, if you have any thoughts or if you've had any conversations on that. I haven't.
I'm not familiar with the CIP for sidewalk in that area at all. You can go back and look, but it's not ringing a bell as something I remember seeing in the CIP.
And our CIP just went for 5 to 10 years. That's why I was asking maybe.
There might be something, but like I said, that's in the public works CIP. I've only looked I'm only aware of like the immediate, so.
Sure.
Alexa,
do we have anything in our bike and ped plan down in that
And
area?
I don't believe this is in the plan, but it is definitely the type of thing that we would put in our priority list.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we can keep it on the list or put it on the list.
What I'd like to see for the east side is have like how the Riverwalk is, have like a boardwalk along
Trail.
the lake. Like a nice wide boardwalk. I was at one of the visiting sessions, and I was talking to a guy who said he owns a lot of the property on the lake, and he was in favor of that too. Like he would certainly allow that on his property.
What section was that?
Right along the lake shore, or the whole, pretty much from I would say from the Pioneer down to the boat landing, 24th Street boat landing. It'd be nice because especially like if you're driving in from the south, and all of a sudden, it's kind of wooded, and then all of a sudden, boom, it opens up, that nice big lake view. It's how they envisioned the Riverwalk, many years ago. It'd be nice if we could have, like I said, like a nice big boardwalk along the lake. And one other thing I'd like to bring up is I attended the corridor sessions for South Park and 9th, and I brought up how 20th Ave extension was taken off the master plan. And the guy running the session said he thought it might be a good idea to revisit that, because when it was taken off, we didn't really have anything on South Main. Now you got the arena, so you got people wanting to come, from the west to South Main area. And a lot of that land is vacant on the where 20th would go through anyway, because there was a guy who was going to put some apartments in or something, and that must have fallen through.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, there's a couple of houses that would have to be taken down.
Well, just saying, if you add it to the plan, I'm not saying like we need to go out and buy these properties within the next year, just so like no further construction could be added, and then possibly down the road add something. Because like your 20th is such a great, it's probably the best traffic moving street we have. And if you want people to go from the west side, from out of town, over to the arena, that would be your natural.
I'm sure why the area doesn't want to show up. This is the segment I think you're talking about where it hugs the lake.
Yeah, like once you get to around Artie and Ed's there, you got that whole big open lake view.
Mm-hmm.
So, it'd be nice if we had like a big boardwalk there and people could bike and walk. Like I utilize like the Riverwalk and some of the other trails quite a bit, just, walking. Yeah, I don't remember who presented that corridor study, but like I said, I brought that up, and he said it'd be probably a good time to take a look at adding that back in.
Well, I think that'll, Mark's the right person to talk to about that type of stuff, so I think he took notes, so I think he heard your comments. I don't know. Regarding this.
There's no other comments? Then, do you need any action?
Nope. So what I mentioned at the beginning, what we were hoping is that after this presentation, then to take this to each of the boards at a future meeting for recommendation, and then take those recommendations to council as we consider the capital budgeting process for next year. It's too late to get anything like this done this year, but that gives us boards time to chew on this, make their recommendation, and then get it to council. And then council will have time to consider this for our CIP for next year so that some funding could be set aside if, if they decide that's a good idea. I think we just got.
So if next month it goes back to both traffic and to bike and ped, then you would imagine like a couple weeks later on council, is that what you're thinking?
Yeah.
So like an August-ish?
Probably the second August meeting. Do you know when your August meeting is?
Third Thursday?
Might be a short time. Might have to be the 1st September if we can turn it around between Thursday and Tuesday for council or not. Because you meet earlier in the week prior, right? So if not the second August meeting, I would anticipate the 1st September meeting. Just trying to make sure we have sufficient time to get it on council.
You good there, Lauren?
Yeah, sorry, I was looking at the calendar.
That's awesome.
Calendar.
All right, so I'll accept the motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Second?
all in favor?
Aye.
Did they had to adjourn the traffic?
Those members of the Parking and Traffic Board, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Dan first, I need a second. Second from Courtney, all in favor? Call the.
Aye.
Actually, I was gonna ask the roll be
Oh, I thought
called.
you were going for a.
Nope, sorry, my
Oh,
bad. Marlene, would you call the roll?
Unschneider? Shazinski?
Aye.
Hanson?
Aye. Sorry.
Perfect. So I think both boards are adjourned.
Well, thank you.